Well, yeah, actually, yes, a little bit. To go back to the time wave, I do not think that despite Terence's best efforts and best arguments, I don't think it describes the granularity of time. I don't think that time may have a structure. I don't necessarily think that the I Ching describes it. I mean, on some levels, there are so many holes in the time wave that you could drive a truck through. But having said that, I think what Terence did was that he accidentally stumbled on an ancient Chinese calendar, or he actually showed that is what the I Ching is. It's a calendar. And he could make that argument. And and part of this is it's a perfect 13-month lunar year. 6 times 64 is 384. And you can map that to a 13-month lunar year, each month of 28 days, right? More or less it fits. And actually, if he had stopped there and said, I have rediscovered that the I Ching is a lunar calendar, he would have been famous to about a dozen people who spend their lives thinking about these, to archaeologists and sinologists and people that study ancient Chinese texts and all that. He would have been, and it was a brilliant sort of accidental rediscovery. So on some levels it works, but that is just cyclic. I mean, you can postulate these cycles. Where he differed was that he said, no, it's a spiral. It's this spiraling thing that has an end point, and maybe that was just the Catholic in him, because Catholics are preoccupied with the end of days, right? But maybe if he just forgot all that and said, this is a great cycle, see how well it predicts or how well it works as a calendar, because it certainly does work as a calendar, which makes you think that that may have been what the I Ching was in an earlier configuration. And there's nothing wacko or strange or even particularly interesting about. I mean, it's interesting, but that's about all it is. And he wanted to go farther than that, Yeah, I think Terence probably did rediscover it. I mean, I remember he actually did that when he finally came back to the States and decided to finish his BA in shamanic studies, and he had some kind of I'm not sure what it was, a Chinese archaeology or some kind of course that he was taking, undergraduate course, and wrote his paper on this time wave idea, on the time wave as a calendar, and his professor was blown away. Of course, he didn't hint of how really wacko it was.
Or how he discovered it.
Right. No. But his professor was quite impressed. In fact, isn't he heading a movement to change all that?
Yes.
Good luck.
I know.
So we say. No way.
Well, I think there may be some truth to that. Certainly the way that we think about time has a lot to do with the way that we live our lives, and the way that non-literate, illiterate, non-Western culture views time changes a great deal about how they live. So I don't disagree with that. I am not sure, I'm not sure that the quickest approach to fixing what our problem is to change the calendar. I mean, maybe it would accomplish a lot, but it seems like a quixotic quest in a way, because it's not going to happen. I mean, that the world is going to adopt a new calendar is about as there's about as much chance of that as Dennis Kucinich will be elected president. You know, yeah, it would do the world a lot of good, but it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I think part of our problem is that maybe we need to reframe the whole conceptual matrix in a way, and maybe we need to stop thinking about how are we going to escape. You know, maybe that's the wrong way to think about it, because if we look at it in terms of escape, well, escape to where? Escape from what? You know, what we should be thinking about is how are we going to make it work? You know, how are we going to get through this bottleneck? I feel sure that we are in a cultural, historical, technological, ecological bottleneck. If we can get through the next 50 years, I mean, within 50 years, it will be clear, you know, whether we're going to get through the bottleneck and go on to become the, you know, enlightened bodhisattvas, you know, flying our starships throughout the cosmos and spreading the wisdom and light and joy, or whether we're going to, you know, go back to barbarism and die on a frying planet. You know, I mean, the choices seem pretty stark, and it'll be clear within 50 years. It'll probably be clear a lot sooner than that. It will probably be clear in our lifetime. So right now, you know, I mean, the situation looks pretty grim, and right now we have no escape hatch that's apparent. You know, we don't have the capability to leave the planet. We don't have, you know, even if that were desirable, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, we don't, you know, there is nowhere to run to. We're kind of stuck where we are, and so we've got to try to make that work as much as possible, you know. Or we come to a decision and say, well, it's not going to work. It's been a good run. You know, we got 100 years left. Party on, you know. Or try to look beyond that. You know, I just don't know. But I mean, given that historical situation, you know, Jesus isn't coming. You know, the space aliens aren't coming. You know, but having said that, we, you know, being rationalists and being scientists and all that, we shouldn't close the door to new data. You know, there's always the chance that something will, you know, show up on the radar screen that really is novel, that changes the whole thing, you know. And so that's reason for hope, but not necessarily sit around waiting for that to happen. But you can sort of keep that in mind, that might happen. It's a possibility, and if it did, that would be great. But in the meanwhile, we have to have this working assumption that, you know, we got ourselves into this fix and we have to get ourselves out of it somehow. And it could come various ways, you know. I mean, there could be some technological breakthrough. I mean, it's not inconceivable, you know. I mean, something like nanotechnology or free energy or, you know, more efficient ways of doing it. But history has shown, you know, that for every new technology, there's a whole set of new problems that come with it, which is okay. I mean, as long as you sort of know that and expect that, it's all right, because you expect new problems. I mean, nobody, you know, the automobile spawned all sorts of new problems that rendered the problems of, you know, cleaning up horse shit from, you know, horses and buggies kind of moot, you know. I mean, that was a problem, but you know what I mean? And so this whole set of new problems may may render what we regard as an intractable situation, silly or irrelevant, and that would be fine. And then we'd have a whole other set of problems to deal with. And maybe that's just the way it is. We sort of stumble through history this way. I don't rule out anything. I mean, you can't rule out anything. Anything could happen. So, I think it was Whitehead that said, that the suspended judgment is the essence of the scientific stance, or something like that. I forget the exact quotation, but the point he was making is, it's okay to say that you don't have enough data. That is not an anti-scientific thing to say. It's a very scientific thing to say. It's essentially admitting that you don't have the full picture to make a judgment. And if you look at the whole range of what we know, we certainly don't have the full picture. And so I find that a reason for hope, not despair. It means there's always something more to find out. It gives us a reason to stick around, right? I mean, I want to know what's going to happen next week, next year, 10 years from now, even though it may get rough. But it's that curiosity, that pulls us forward. And maybe that's what our brains are doing. And, these messages, which we experience as messages that seem to come through the psychedelics, that seem to be some sort of, I'm not sure, logos that's coming from the community of sentient species and all that. We have a strong intuition that, that is coming through. Pinchbeck in his book, at the end of the book finally concludes that, our destiny is not under our control, and it's not the mundane, forces of history that are propelling us. It's, that we're controlled by demons, spirits, fourth dimensional alien intelligences existing in the quantum interstices of, this one. But all that may be so, but what are the implications of that? Or, if that's true, one can conclude that, all these sort of extra dimensional forces don't seem to have our best interests in mind. One could think that they're quite malevolent, or maybe they're not even consciously malevolent. Maybe to us, and we don't worry too much about the ontological and moral implications of slapping a mosquito, and it may be on that level to them. They just grind on, and if we get in the way, then we come up against these historical crises. I don't know. Yeah.
How about psychedelic?
Yeah. Well, you're familiar with Shulgin's work and all this. Alexander Shulgin's work, right? So, yeah, there are all kinds of there are all sorts of new psychedelics that, I don't know what's new, but, they're molecules, and so medicinal chemists like to tweak molecules. So there's an endless flow of these things. And we're learning a lot about the brain and how the brain interacts with these things. To me, that's more exciting than this proliferation of molecules. Although the molecules are very useful because they're tools for exploring this brain-mind interface, and in that sense they're very useful. There's a whole bunch of psychoactive plants out there that have been reported ethnographically for years that people know little or nothing about the pharmacology of. So that leads to breakthroughs. I mean, a good example of that is Salvia divinorum, which is now very, very popular. You can buy it in head shops and all that, and there's great concern. Although why, I'm not sure, other than the concern that, the concern over Salvia divinorum seems to be, my God, my kids are getting high on a plant I never heard of. This has to be bad, even though, try and find a single emergency room adverse event or anything. I mean, this stuff, but anyway, that's a whole other political diatribe. But Salvia divinorum is interesting because, 10 years ago, we knew that it was psychoactive. We had no idea how it worked. But because people were taking it, Daniel Siebert especially was kind of the advocate of salvia, and he got some very clever scientists involved. So now we pretty much know how Salvia divinorum works, and this compound is quite interesting, because of its properties, because it is so selective for this one receptor, the kappa opiate receptor. And it is so potent at that one receptor. That's very unusual for a natural product to have that property, and it contains nitrogen. It doesn't contain nitrogen, rather, which again makes it very unusual from a pharmacological point of view, because most CNS active things are alkaloid-like, they contain nitrogen. This one doesn't. So it's an anomalous thing, and it's led to a lot of discoveries. It's been a very useful tool, apart from whether the plant should be banned or people shouldn't take it or whatever. I mean, I just view this sort of knee-jerk reaction to, when an unknown, a new psychoactive plant comes down the pike. There's this knee-jerk impulse to ban it, as though that is, and people, I mean, that stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the plant kingdom, the chemical biodiversity that exists in the plant kingdom, if you want to put it that way. For every salvia that gets attention, there are a dozen out there that nobody's ever heard of, and they'll be the next one. I mean, you can't criminalize all of nature.